weatherman here. Hopefully, you guys are doing well. Ongoing severe weather threat and new tornado watch just got issued not long ago. This one now includes the state of Mississippi, mainly towards the north central part. We have more of Louisiana involved here, starting to lean more in towards northeastern Louisiana as well. Parts of Arkansas involved as well. Couple of tornado warnings towards southern Arkansas right now, and now we have a slew of flood watches issued. We'll go over the flood threat in tomorrow morning's video. That being said, we also have our winter weather side where we still have blizzard warnings ongoing, winter storm watches, winter storm warnings, and winter weather advisories. We'll start out with the severe weather side this time, and then we'll transition into the winter weather side afterwards. Storm Prediction Center's even bringing up more meso discussions regarding heavy snow beyond where the blizzard point is, because snow is actually falling as we speak right now in these areas. But over towards the Minnesota, Dakota, and the Dakotas border, that's where we're discussing the next threat of heavy snow. Wouldn't surprise me if some areas over here saw some thunder snow. I haven't seen any reports as of yet, but there have been some pretty significant snowfall totals, especially over towards South Dakota. We'll go over that in a minute. So we know about our severe weather threat that's ongoing for tonight, but we do also have an enhanced risk for tomorrow. So we'll go over the details with that. And if you really look at it closely, it's very similar to today. This enhanced risk is led by the tornado threat mostly. There is also a hatched risk, so there's a threat for strong to violent tornadoes possible over here. Actually, I would say maybe even more so tomorrow than today. Actually, shear and wind profiles of strong storm relative velocities are ridiculous, even more so than today, I would say. So we'll be watching towards the Gulf Coast, or just past the east of Jackson, Mississippi as well. Mobile, Biloxi, we're watching you guys really closely. We also can't rule out even Birmingham being in the action here too. New Orleans, you're in there too. You're actually in the enhanced risk area as well. So we'll be watching you guys all throughout the day. Then we also have the threat of damaging winds here. Most significantly between Mobile and New Orleans. I think that little corridor between the two cities is going to be the hottest area, or maybe just to the north of it. And then our hail threat is going to be the weakest, as the lapse rates will start to drop off just a bit tomorrow. Also have to mention that we also have a day 3 slight risk, but by this point a lot of the dynamics are going to start to kind of fall off here. We can't rule out the threat of a tornado, but at this point I think the system's going to be linear and kind of running out of gas at this point. We can't rule out the greatest severe activity being over towards Florida, but areas like Savannah, Georgia, Brunswick, Georgia, we can't rule you out. Charleston, South Carolina, can't rule you out. Maybe even as far north as Myrtle Beach, we can't even rule you guys out from being involved in a potential slight risk. The marginal actually goes as far north as the Hatteras region, so we'll have to watch over there as well. We also have to keep an eye on Tallahassee as well as Panama City for the threat of severe weather too over the next couple of days. So let's go ahead and take a look at some parameters here. We're going to start out by looking at our CAPE values. We're going to jump to the current time right now, if I can. There we go. I always got to hold my breath here with this computer sometimes. So we do get some pretty sufficient CAPE values overnight. There's some spots where we still are looking at some 1500, 1600 joules per kilogram. More than sufficient enough for severe weather. I think this is where the greatest tornado threat will be in the nocturnal hours. And then when we look at what happens tomorrow here, so in the morning hours we kind of have a drop off in the Cape. But once we get to about 17 to 18 Z, look at the resurgence that we end up getting. Especially over towards New Orleans. That's where I'm really concerned. Look at that, 2,000 joules per kilogram. That's higher than what we saw today. And as a result, with the higher wind profile, it shouldn't be any surprise that we end up seeing this right here. Particularly dangerous situation tornado. Very high Cape values pushing towards the 5, or very high significant tornado parameter pushing towards the 5s. Storm relative velocity over 300 meters squared per second. So there's a lot of danger with this setup right here. We don't like how this looks at all. So we roll this along, and these Cape values do continue to go over Louisiana, and it's not really until about 22Z where things start to drop off. So if we do the math with that, that's about maybe it's about maybe 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So the storm threat will start to diminish a little bit, or the worst of the severe threat will start to diminish by this point. Still can't rule out some strong to severe storms over the Florida Panhandle as we get into the overnight hours. We still have Cape values over 1,000 joules per kilogram, more than sufficient enough to spark off a few severe storms. But by the time we get to Thursday, look at what happens with the Cape. Really starts to minimize here, kind of hangs offshore more so. We have to look towards the peninsula part of Florida, though, for the next threat of severe weather. But even then, the Cape's kind of broken up. The dynamics are kind of broken up at this point. So by the time we get into Thursday afternoon, which would, in a normal situation, be more towards peak time, these storms are going to be mostly offshore, or at least most of the energy will be offshore. So the threat's going to be relatively minimal and relatively quick, too, I would say. So let's go ahead and quickly look at the significant tornado parameter as well. Simply because we kind of have an idea of where our hotspots are here, but let's go ahead and confirm them. There's no reason not to at this point. Okay, so this is about where we are current time, I would say. We have some areas where we're still sitting at about 2.8. Some areas could be sitting at 3. And this is where our tornado threat's going to be highest over the next few hours as the storms are exiting Texas, heading into Louisiana. And we'll kind of see a little bit of a drop off here as we get into the overnight hours. But some stronger tornadoes are still possible, especially towards central Mississippi. But the activity is going to easily pick back up. And then we'll talk about the storm mode here, which is kind of promoting this. But over here, like I said, over towards New Orleans is where I am really concerned. Like, you can see these Cape values already starting to push up into 3. And this is in getting into the afternoon hours. This is still late morning. Things really start to pick up once we get towards about lunchtime. We see some areas here in the pink where we're getting into those 5s. Very dangerous right here. And this is almost right over Louisiana. Like New Orleans, actually, excuse me. And you can see Cape value, mixed layer Cape of 2,100 joules per kilogram, 379 meters squared per second squared for storm relative felicity. Sufficient wind shear, lapse rate. Ideal setup for a supercell. Ideal setup for a strong tornado, maybe even a violent one. So this is a very alarming setup. So, and if you happen to be watching this video and you live in New Orleans, don't play around with this. This is no joke. If this ends up coming to fruition, this could be a very, very intense day. So we'll move this along, and of course, just like with the Cape values, the SDP starts to drop off as the dynamics start to fade. There is a little spot here where we do get a little bit of a maximum here in the SDP. And of course, with that, our dominant threat is going to be tornadoes as we get into the Florida Panhandle. But notice how the storm relative felicity's dropped off by almost 100 meters squared per second squared. Still can't rule out a supercell, and that's still more than sufficient enough to produce. So don't downplay that. The mixed layer Cape is still at about 1,300. Is still at about 1,350 joules per kilogram. So it's definitely not over as we get into the overnight hours on Wednesday and into Thursday. But once we get into the early morning hours on Thursday, tornado threat really starts to drop off here. And even as these storms will go through central Florida, the significant tornado parameter doesn't really look all that impressive. We're mainly looking at ones. If you're lucky, you might get up to about maybe a 1.5 or a 2, but for the most part, should be a little bit quieter on Thursday here. And my computer's frozen. All right. So we're going to have to move this one around a little bit, but we're going to take a look at the storm modes here. We're going to move this up a bit. I had to actually refresh this really quickly. But you can almost see that this line kind of breaks down a little bit into a semi-discrete type of mode. So we do have to keep an eye on the threat for tornadoes, especially as we get into this current time frame that we're in right now. So there could be like a little small area here where we could get some prefrontal cells that pop up here, or a line of prefrontal cells, and then eventually the main wind threat will come through behind that. Eventually storms do end up congealing into the overnight hours, but there are signs that there could be embedded supercells in there as well. Prefrontal storms start to pop up around 08Z, which would be probably in the into the overnight hours, I would say. Have to watch that for potential activity. And like I said, this is probably going to be a multi-round event, especially over towards areas like New Orleans, and maybe over towards Lake Pontchartrain. So we'll have to watch you guys. Baton Rouge, I'm not ruling you guys out either. Haven't forgotten about you at all. So this is about 8 a.m. I would say, and we're gonna switch this over. So this is about where we were before I had to switch the maps over to here. And you can kind of see these prefrontal cells here popping up. You see there's a couple of kidney beans mixed in there here and there. And like I said, it's really not until about 17Z where things really start to get a little wild here. But you can already see even by 15Z that there's several little supercells out ahead of this main line here, and you can even see that this main line's kind of devolved into a little bit more of a semi-discrete look, and these do have a supercellular mode to them as well, so this could be a pretty active time as well. And this will be getting into the late morning and early afternoon hours. This is when I think the threat will be highest. And then eventually this will also congeal into a line once we get into the late evening hours. And eventually it will lose a lot of its kick to it. We'll have to watch, of course, towards the Florida Panhandle, which I think will have the greatest risk of ending up with some little feeder bands or just semi-discrete supercells over this region. Although at this point, it's starting to look a little less impressive than what I was seeing earlier today. Once we get into Thursday, once we start looking more into Thursday, this line of storms becomes a lot less impressive. Looking more towards a linear threat. Could be a little bit of hail here and there, but maybe towards the coast there could be a strong storm here or there. But as we go towards Thursday, it just looks really sloppy at this point. Nothing impressive. Wouldn't even be surprised if Thursday may get downgraded to a marginal risk. But that's a severe weather threat, though, for right now. We'll see how things progress with tomorrow, but I definitely would consider this a red letter day in its own right. But anywhere between, I would say, Biloxi and New Orleans, well, not Biloxi, but Mobile and New Orleans. This corridor right here in particular is going to be really dangerous. There's also a little corridor, I would think, just to the north, maybe just a little bit to the south and east of Jackson, Mississippi. We'll have to watch you guys too. Those two corridors seem the most dangerous to me as of right now. So just stay weather aware if you happen to be watching this video, especially. But stay weather aware and take heed to those warnings. 'Cause there could very well be a big tornado on the ground if this holds true. Now let's go ahead and look at the wintry side of this system here. A lot of the snow is actually still falling right now over these regions, so we haven't even seen the lion's share of our actual totals. But this is just over the last 24 hours. Here's what's fallen. We have spots over in South Dakota, maybe towards south central South Dakota, even, where we're seeing about 6 to 8 inches. And there's a lot of areas towards central South Dakota where we're looking at about 4 inches of snow. Maybe some spots are at 2 inches currently. Now, keep in mind, like I said, the worst of the weather is still yet to come from the looks of it right now. From the looks of it right now, or it's actually occurring. We'll go ahead and take a look at the models and see what's going on at the moment. But also over towards the Rockies, we have some pretty significant totals in our and they have significant totals in their own right. Trying to get this to move. There we go. We have some spots just on the Colorado and Wyoming border. Jeez, I am having a hard time here. But the Colorado Wyoming border that are seeing about 1 to 2 feet of snow. Nothing unexpected given the size of this system. And then we can also see spots in Idaho where we're getting up to about 12 inches or more. And of course, over towards northeastern Nevada, we have some pretty impressive snowfall as well over in the mountains. But this is what we have going on right now as far as what our reflectivity imagery is looking like. As I said, a lot of the snow is still falling right now over this region. The storm system's not in too much of a hurry, and the snow show really starts to develop right about now, actually. And this kind of just swirls around, so you're just getting band after band after band of snow alongside these high wind gusts. And this is probably when blizzard conditions are the most likely to occur. And these will probably linger over this region where the isobars are in the tightest. This is where we're probably going to be seeing the strongest of wind. Over towards North Dakota, I think we're going to start to really pick up on the snow into the overnight hours here. Another thing to make note of here is the ice storm potential that was over towards Iowa. We're not really seeing that now. It's kind of leaning a little bit more towards Wisconsin more so than Iowa before, as it was yesterday. So I'll have to watch and see where that goes, but I don't expect too much out of it. We'll have to check it out and see how much warm air is aloft with this. But it looks like we're kind of lingering more towards being either at or below freezing in a lot of these areas. So this will potentially limit some of the freezing rain that may fall here. There could still be pockets in towards Iowa that end up getting a fair amount of freezing rain. Same can be said for southern parts of Minnesota, but again, I'm not expecting a whole lot out of this. We're lingering mostly towards the freezing line. I'm thinking sleet would be the more likely of the winter precip type to be falling. So we'll move this along now, and we're getting into the morning hours of Wednesday. The snow band is really started to develop around this region, so it's almost like you're getting a second round here. And things don't really start to thin out until Wednesday afternoon around the western half of South Dakota, or so we think, because then we see yet another band come in, and this is being fed in from. This is being preceded by the cold air that's wrapping around the backside of the system, and the lingering moisture that's also coming in from that's coming in, or remnant moisture that's coming in on the backside of the system as well. So our final snowfall totals are basically going to be from multiple rounds. And then you're going to have yet another wave over in this region on late Thursday evening and into maybe even Friday morning, early Friday morning, where we get even more snow. All while in the meanwhile, over towards the Great Lakes, You guys are going to start to get slammed as of tomorrow night. And this will only pick up in intensity as we start to get into Thursday morning here. And then also, another thing to make note of is we also look over towards West Virginia and actually towards the Delmarva here for potential of ice. What looks like a pretty intense potential for ice. It's a probable hazard type of freeze. Does seem like there's a little section right here where there's some warm air aloft just above the low level jet area, where the low level jet area would be. So we'll have to watch for freezing rain over in this region, and we'll just go from there. But any areas that have a potential for a quarter-inch ice are the areas that I'm gonna be more concerned for. I'm thinking this we may start to see a little bit of ice early on, maybe even towards Philadelphia here. Have to keep a close eye on this region as well as time goes on. All right, we're back in for now. So we can watch this freezing line actually creep its way into Philadelphia here, and then eventually we end out as snow over here, especially as this low begins to move a little bit more as we head into Friday. And this will continue to bring snow as this moves a little bit further off to the east here, and to the north and east, I should say. And then this low pressure here develops, and this adds a little bit extra moisture, and we could get snow that lasts a little bit longer around the Great Lakes region, especially towards Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, leading to greater snowfall totals around the northeast. So in total, when we look at this as a whole, because this event ultimately is going to end up lasting into Sunday, and we'll start to get more in depth with the northeast snowfall potential there. But if we do a model comparison here, this is looking about 156 hours out maximum from this model run. This is heading into Monday night. Here's what our three models that we have available at the time are showing. Over towards the Canadian model here, we're still looking at remaining snowfall to fall over here. We could still see another 6 to 10 inches in a lot of areas. Some areas around eastern and central South Dakota and North Dakota, we could see up to about another foot, according to them. Nebraska could see another 6 to 9 inches possibly. Some really heavy snowfall is expected around central Minnesota and into northern Wisconsin. Also some higher values over towards southern and central Wisconsin too. Then when we get to the northeast, we get some big totals here. We start to get into at least a foot for a lot of regions. Some areas could see up to about a foot and a half. Can't rule out a spot in the higher elevations, maybe even getting up to about 2 feet. Over towards the Great Lakes, I think some higher totals are possible. This is close to Buffalo here. I saw 29 inches, so that's almost 2.5 feet of snow. So a very aggressive look from the GDPS here. GFS is, I would say, a little bit more realistic in regards to the totals. I still think that there is a lot of snow left to fall over in this region. We could still see another 10 inches in a lot of places over towards the western Dakotas. Nebraska starts to get a little less snow here. We could still see up to about 4 to 6 inches more, though, than what we already have down now. And then there's a big swath of snow again, and I'm starting to see a lot more agreement with this over in this region, especially over towards the Great Lakes and UP of Michigan, where we could see up to almost 2 feet. But a lot of areas are looking at about a foot and a half, somewhere between 6 to 10 inches. Then over towards the northeast, still getting some impressive values, especially over towards Buffalo. I'm hoping that this doesn't end up being another snow emergency for them, but we're seeing consistent values. We're looking at above 18 inches of snow. Could be more than that. Then over towards Philadelphia, New York here, we're we're getting a heavy dose of snow here too. Some places could be seeing up to a foot, maybe more than that. This storm has been a monster so far, so it wouldn't surprise me if this ended up coming into fruition. And then we have a nice swath of snow as we head towards northern Maine. No surprises there. In total, when we compare this with the National Weather Service blended models, this is a little bit more conservative. But even so, these are still impressive values. We're looking at about maybe another foot, maybe foot and a half of snow more in the western parts of the Dakotas. Towards Nebraska, we could still see another 2 to 3 inches yet to fall. As we go further and further along here, there's that swath of snow that I was talking about. In this area, we could still see up to about 1 to 2 feet. Some places even a little bit more than that. Saw one spot even have 31 or 34 inches actually. Wow. Could be a spot in here that may even get up to 3 feet. And then the same can be said for northern Wisconsin over towards the UP of Michigan. Some pretty intense snowfall could be expected there as well. And just off the lake seemed to be a really hot spot. The Great Lakes seemed to be a real hot spot here, where we could see about another 6 to 10 inches in a lot of places. Towards the mountain ranges in New York here, the Adrianex, I would say maybe another a foot could be possible, maybe a little bit more than that. And then over towards New York, we could still New York City and parts of Philadelphia, we could still see somewhere between 3 to maybe even 12 inches, depending on which part of the city you're in here. Very interesting. It's a very interesting forecast. Very complex forecast as well. Vermont's going to get slammed from the looks of it as well as New Hampshire, and then of course northern Maine. There's no surprise here. We already know you're going to get a fair share of snow. But that's the end of this video. It was another long one. Apologize for that, but it's a lot to cover. I'm just trying to cover all the ends that I can, at least for tonight. I will be talking about the flood threat tomorrow morning's video, so look forward to that, and kind of detailing the final timeline of tomorrow's severe weather threat. So, anyways, I'm gonna get off of here. This has been Tired Metalhead Weatherman. You guys have a good night.